Okay, tonight's presentation will be Walking with AAVSO Giants, a 60s personal journey, my fellow member Dr. Roger Kolman. For the amateur, astronomy is generally thought of as a hobby. However, throughout history, individuals have been able to contribute to the research in science. One long-standing method amateurs have been able to contribute to professional research is through observing variable stars. Amateur contributions have been an integral part of the American Association of Variable Star Observers. AAVSO was established in 1911 to coordinate variable star observations for the Harvard College Observatory. The organization was largely comprised of amateur astronomers and assisted by contributing observation of variable stars to the AAVSO International Database. Tonight, Roger will share with us his walk with giants of amateur astronomy and beyond. Roger is a longtime member of the NAA. In addition, he has been an active member of the American Association of Variable Star Observers, contributing over 75,000 observations over 57 years. Professionally, he holds a PhD in physics from the University of Illinois. He has taught physics, mathematics, education, and astronomy at the secondary, college, and graduate level for over 50 years. Please welcome Dr. Roger Kolman.
By the way, it's interesting that Kurt mentioned the history of the AAVSO with Harvard College, because it was a gentleman's club, and there was actually very little observing that went on. There was a lot of socializing that went on. And there's a, they studied whatever heavenly bodies were around. There's an interesting book called The Story of the AAVSO that has the whole history in it. And if you get a chance to get a hold of that book somehow, it's really an interesting read. But now, I gave this talk originally at the centennial of the AAVSO in 1911, 20. And so the method, this was done in collaboration with Mike Simonson, who sadly passed away suddenly about a year ago. I called to see how he was doing, and Irene, his wife, said he passed away this morning. So I had to make a trip out to Michigan to attend his wake, and turned out that I was the only AAVSO member at the wake, and I was very sad to see that he had been forgotten. But Mike and I had gotten in some trouble with the leadership of the AAVSO, and so we weren't really welcome at headquarters anymore. So originally, I had a friend who lived across from me, and he had a 3-inch Tasco telescope. And we used to, it was safe in Chicago to the point where we would walk to the Adler Planetarium from Division and Costner Avenue, which is 1200 north and about 4400 west. We'd walk to the planetarium to pick up Sky and Telescope. Wouldn't it have been easier for us to subscribe? No. You know, we're 15 years old at the time, and we wanted to get our exercise. Anyway, one night he wanted to find M81, and he couldn't find it. And I said to him, Dave, let me try. He says, oh, you'll never find it. You don't have a telescope. Well, I found it. And so he got mad at me and he sold me his telescope. And I still have that telescope today, by the way. It's hanging in my garage. So in 1961, Clint Ford wrote an article called Sidelights on Observing Variable Stars. And it was an inspiration. He explained how you could do real scientific work from your backyard just by using a telescope. And so I wrote to Clint, and he was talking about the AAVSO, and I wanted to join. Well, I was too young. And I said, oh, please, 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 can you get me in? And so he vouched for me, said to the head of the AAVSO, look, Margaret, I got in, and I was underage, and look at me today. Let the kid in. So they allowed me to join, and in 1962, I joined the AAVSO, and at the time, they kept a list of members. And I found out, here's this guy who lived about 2 blocks from my high school named Dick Wen. Well, I went to visit him, and we got to be friends. And here he is. Hate to talk about competitors, but this is at the 16-inch telescope at the Racine Astronomical Society. I don't know what's happened with that club. They used to be extremely active, and I guess clubs go in cycles. So, I saw a tube in Dick's basement, and I said, what's that, a water heater? And he said, no, it's the tube for a 10-inch telescope. And so he said, are you interested in it? I said, well, I haven't got the money for it. He says, well, I'll finance it, you pay me back. So I got the 10-inch telescope, and this is about 1964. I had a lot more hair then. So then we started communicating with Carolyn Hurlis and Curtis Anderson and a couple of other people in the AAVSO. And we were invited to come to the Hurlises on November 23rd, 1963. Anybody know what that date was?
Yeah. Kennedy's.
Yeah, the day after the Kennedy assassination. So we're hearing all about, the search for Oswald and all that as we're driving down there. And so we had some discussions with Carolyn about the social aspects of the AAVSO, and the correspondence among all these people was so incredible that Carolyn just couldn't keep up with it anymore. And so she started a newsletter called Variable Views, which became kind of the unofficial journal of the AAVSO. And so she had a bunch of proteges that came out of Variable Views. She started them going. One of them was Ernst Mayr. Another one was Paul Sventek, who was a member of the military and set up a group in Alaska. And he told me that one time a meteor was going overhead and he could hear the sizzle from the meteor.
Wow.
And another one was Vicki Schmitz, who today is a very successful judge in Colorado. She thinks variable star observing is silly. We spoke one time and she said, "Are you still doing that silly stuff?" And I said, "Yes, I am." Okay, and then 1964, there was a spring meeting in St. Louis, and I gave my first paper at that meeting. And here I am, 19 years old, and scared to death. And the director of the AAVSO, Margaret Mayo, who's like a grandmother to me, I should say mother, took me to the side and she says, "Don't be afraid. Forget the audience out there. Just look at me. And you're just talking to me." I said, "Okay." So I gave the talk and it went over pretty well. And I don't even remember what the talk was about. Oh, it was about the formula for calculating the limiting magnitude of telescopes of a given size. And so, coming from the bar is a gentleman with a martini in his hand. This gentleman. And he says, "That was a fine talk, young man, a fine talk. Margaret's been saying some very good things about you." I said, "Well, thank you." And it was Ellen Hynek. So, he and Margaret encouraged me to pursue a career in astronomy, and I'm glad I didn't. I instead pursued a career in physics and ended up actually doing some interesting work. I did my dissertation work at Argonne in the chemistry department. I was doing spectroscopy, the spectroscopy of diatomic molecules, and at the time we were doing barium oxide, and we were trying to look at the vibrational structure of the molecule, and it had been very poorly studied a few years earlier. And I was working with one of the world's leading atomic spectroscopists. And so he looked at the spectra that I had obtained, and excuse me, ladies in the audience, but he says, "You call this shit science?" It was just so much stuff there. So anyway, I worked with the Paschen-Runge spectrometer. Remember that really big round spectroscope at Argonne? It was a marvel to work with, and they gave me a piece of it when they tore it down. So I have that as a memorandum. Anyway, we'll come back to Hynek again later. So in 1964, there was a dedication of the Schoonover Observatory in Lima, Ohio, and this began what was the beginning of the August orgy at the Hurlis house. And so basically we were up all night. We were talking about variable stars and everything else, and even doing some musical numbers. And this is Curtis Anderson, who suffered from MS, and in spite of it, he would observe from his wheelchair.
Wow.
Using a 10-inch telescope. A remarkable individual. So, at the Schoonover Observatory dedication, here are some dignitaries. We've got Newton Mayall, who is Margaret Mayall's husband. Me, Clint Ford, Tommy Craig came in from California, Leslie himself, George Diedrich, Ed Oravec, who did 134,000 variable stars from New York City using binoculars.
Wow.
A remarkable observer. And then Curtis Anderson. And there's herself, Carolyn Hurlis, with the Schoonover telescope. By the way, the Peltier Award, which is given annually, and I'm the chairman of the committee, we gave the award last year to Barbara Harris, who rediscovered Scorpii, recurrent nova, and posthumously we gave the award to Carolyn Hurlis. So now she's a Peltier Award winner. And this year we gave the award to Julius Benton of the ALPO for his work with being the head of the Saturn group and his studies of Saturn and Venus. Okay, so we had all kinds of groups together. Here we have Don Hurlis, Carolyn's husband, Dick Wind, me, Curtis Anderson, Ed Oravec, Carolyn, Clint Ford, and Tom Craig. And there's Tom sleeping in. And this is Tom observing with his concoction called the Plumber's Nightmare. It's a telescope made completely of plumbing parts. And here we are at Leslie's backyard and at the Hurlis house. By the way, there's an interesting story about how Leslie got that telescope. His two sons went to the University of Miami or University of Ohio in Miami, Ohio. And they were taking down their observatory, which housed a 12-inch Clark refractor. And one of his sons says, "Boy, I'll bet my dad would be interested in that." And they said, "Who's your father?" "Leslie Peltier." "Do you really think he'd be interested?" And he says, "Oh, yeah." So what they did is closed one of the main highways in Ohio to move the telescope from Miami to Delphos and have it installed in Leslie's backyard. And so now, since Leslie passed away, it's disappeared.
Oh.
And nobody knows where it is. So that's a mystery for Agatha Christie to solve. And this is a picture which has been shown all over the place. It's in the history of the AAVSO. This is called the Magnificent Seven. We have Ed Oravec, myself, Leslie, Carolyn Hurlis, Tommy Craig, Curtis Anderson, and Clint Ford. So if you get a hold of that book, History of the AAVSO, you will see this photo in there. So there was a telescope available owned by Claude Carpenter, and they decided to dedicate that to the AAVSO on top of a mountain which was called Mount Peltier. And there was a dedication of the observatory, and so we were invited to that dedication. So on the way, we stopped by to visit Clyde Tombaugh. And so this is Dick Wen, Clyde, and me in front of the physics building at University of New Mexico at Las Cruces. And this is Tombaugh's telescope in his backyard. He's very clever. Since it doesn't rain much, he can leave the telescope out to cover the main mirror. He uses a garbage can lid, and to cover the secondary, he uses a peanut butter jar lid. So here we are at the dedication of Ford Observatory. And there's Tom Craig addressing the group. We didn't have facilities out there, so we erected some with some leftover plywood. And so we had either it's occupied now or it's available now. So then we went to Mount Wilson and visited the 60-inch telescope. And it's rather interesting, while we were there, the observers around heard that Leslie Peltier was in the building. They left their places to come and try to get autographs from Leslie. Then in 1966, I was at the spring meeting in Chicago. In 1968, I presented at the Lima meeting. And there's my paper on limiting magnitudes. I got hung up on that. What I did was added some extra parameters rather than the 10 plus 5 log D, which was the standard formula that was used. I added some extra features in. And here are some of the speakers. Bill Shawcross, late of Sky and Telescope, Bob Cox, Leslie himself, Ralph Buckstaff, and Bob Cox was an interesting character. He was an engineer at McDonnell Douglas, designing some of the optics for our spacecraft. And he came up with this little pocket telescope. And so if someone would ask how small can a telescope be, he'd reach into his pocket and he'd say, well, I'll tell you, you can do this. And he'd flip it together and start observing with it. And it was an interesting gadget. He then became a consultant for Coulter Optics, which made Dobsonian telescopes. And in 1980, we attended the Astronomical League convention at Dallas, yes, thank you. And that's where the Peltier Award actually was born. I thought that Leslie had passed away in May of that year, and I thought that there should be a tribute to Les. And so I proposed the award, and council, I was secretary of the AL at the time, and council said, are you nuts? We don't have the money for an award like that. And I said, well, what if I was able to come up with a sponsor for it? And they said, okay, you come up with a sponsor, come up with a design for the award, have it fabricated, and we'll go along with it. So, I found a sponsor. Mead Instruments agreed to sponsor it. I found someone to do the artwork, found a fabricator to design the plaque and make it, presented the award posthumously to Leslie's widow in October of that year, and at the next AO meeting, we presented the first one to Ed Paulbach. So all that was done in the space of roughly 4 months. And by the way, at that time, I also purchased the optics for the 13.1 inch data, and I still have that scope today. I have all my old scopes. They're like old friends. They're children. You never let them go. But then I also purchased the optics for an 18-inch Dobsonian, and this was supposed to be a retirement present for me. Well, my wife said, retirement present. Yeah, we don't have the means to make it, but you know, down the road, we'll do it. So every time, we were living in Chicago at the time, every time I'd go downstairs into the basement, I'd hear this voice saying, build me, build me. And I had a friend, Dick Wen, said, you know, when I go down in the basement, I keep hearing this voice saying, build me, build me. He had a twin one. So we decided that we were going to, you know, well, just start putzing around and getting some stuff together. Well, we started building the box for each of our telescopes. And we got those parts together. Well, now we had to get a tube. Well, where are we going to get a tube? Well, we found a vendor in up north in Mundelein that made sonotubes, which are the tubes that go around concrete piers. And so we went out to get a sonotube, and we strapped it to my car. And so we're going down the highway, and of course the air is blowing through the sonotube, and it's providing lift for my car. And the rear wheels are leaving the road. And any cars near us were trying to avoid us. And so Dick said, slow down, slow down, slow down. Anyway, we got the thing home, we cut it in half, and we had to tear off the wax coating on it so that we could get to the material itself. Then we had to climb inside and start painting the whole thing. Well, we got that together, built the scope, and this is the scope now, which resides in what my wife likes to call the shed. Now, let me get this back. there's a little more to the story than this. Remember I mentioned at Heineck, I'm a graduate student now, and we were celebrating an anniversary of one of Tom Edison's inventions. And my advisor said, "You know Alan Hynek, don't you?" I said, "Well, I met him a couple of times." And he says, "Good. He's coming from Northwestern to give a talk, and I'd like you to take care of him for the day." I said, "Okay, fine. Be glad to." So we went around and showing him the campus and all that. And so at the end of the day, I was asked to take him to O'Hare to catch a flight. And so as we're driving along, I said, "Where are you going?" And he says, "To Hollywood." And he says, I said, "Well, what are you going to do there?" And he said, "I'm going to be an advisor on a movie." I said, "What movie is that?" He says, "Well, they're calling it Close Encounters of the Third Kind." And he says, "I'm hoping they'll let me be in it." Well, they did. Near the end of the film, when the spaceship is getting close to taking off, you see three gentlemen come forward. One of them is John Connolly's brother. The second one with the pipe and the beard is Alan Hynek. So as we're driving, he's telling me that he's trying to do a study of what scientists have seen, if they've seen any strange objects. And he said, "I've sent questionnaires out to all the professional scientists that I know." And I said, "Oh, you're picking the wrong group." And he said, "What do you mean?" I says, they're in observatories, they're looking through eyepieces, they're not going to see anything. What you really want to do is pick amateurs, and they're the ones who are out there, they're seeing the skies, they're the ones who are going to be able to give you the best information." And he says, "Oh, would you be willing to do this for me?" And I said, "No." He said, "Why not?" And I said, "Dr. Hynek, to be fair, you made a name for yourself on the Vidicon tube, and you've got a whole bunch of honors, and you're tolerated going off on this tangent. I'm just getting started. I can't afford that." He said, "Well, do you mind if I take the idea?" And I says, "Run with it." So he got a student, and he got that student to major in ufology at Northwestern. And he got his PhD in ufology, which was an embarrassment to Northwestern, I'm sure. But the story comes around back here to Naperville, because you had a gentleman in, and I don't remember his name, but he gave a talk here, and he said he was the last astronomer to graduate from Northwestern. They were closing down the department. And he said the reason was that they were embarrassed by this ufology thing. Does anybody remember who he was?
No, but I went to Northwestern and I studied under Hynek, and I don't remember that kind of stuff. I don't know. Hynek, the university always kept us separate from the UFO deals that he did for
Yeah.
Project Blue Book. They didn't want to get too associated
Right.
with that. And he may have gone into that more depth after I graduated in '73. But I always thought
Oh,
Hynek
this was much later.
Yeah, he was pretty soundly grounded when I was there.
Yeah. Anyway, that kind of brings it around to Naperville. And so, all in all, I'd say that these have been the memories of a lifetime. Thank you. Are there any questions? Yes.
In the intervening years, as we've gotten new instruments and things and new insights, has anything fundamentally changed about the mechanics or the science of variable stars themselves?
Yes, actually, when I was secretary of the AAVSO, I proposed having a spectroscopy section. And I was told, what are you, nuts? There's not no one has the instrumentation for that. Well, now I got a newsletter from the AAVSO today, and they're talking about the spectroscopy section. Well, duh, I proposed it years ago. Now, in terms of new technologies, photometry, you can do real-time photometry. In fact, you can even set up your system, go to bed, and then get the data the next day.
Wow.
The work done by amateurs is basically, I would say, quasi-professional at this point. Spectroscopy. AAVSO members have detected exoplanets using spectroscopy. So, yes, technology has changed greatly. Nobody wants visual observations anymore. Any other questions? Yes?
Can you sketch out the science you were doing in, I don't know, let's say 1964? Because I don't have a good feeling for how an amateur would observe variable stars. You didn't have a photometer?
No.
This was
my
so
photometer.
How did that work?
Okay. You have stars that are comparisons. And then you make an estimate. This one's brighter, this one's fainter. You determine how much, you use a step method, and determine the brightness of the star from that. You have charts that have all these comparison stars.
And Roger, Barry Beeman or somebody told me that sometimes if it was a little bit difficult or they were too close to each other, the comparison star and the variable, that they would throw the star out of focus and the size of the disk would be proportional to the magnitude, correct?
Yes, and the brightness of the size of the disk. There also was a trick that was used. If you wanted to increase your magnitude, you take a sniff of oxygen,
Oh,
and that would increase the oxygen going to your brain and thus to your eyes, and you'd see fainter.
Would that throw off your calibration in any way?
No, because everything would be.
and everything.
Everything's relative.
Right.
Okay.
So how does seeing affect variable star observation?
Oh, terribly.
Yeah, horribly, right?
Yeah. If stars are jumping around, you just pack it in for the night.
Oh, okay. So you don't bother doing the observations?
No.
Ah.
Any others? Yes.
Roger, is there a formula or a guideline you can use if you're looking at a star, say, 40 degrees above the horizon, compared to one that's 30 or 20 or 15 regarding interstellar dust?
Yeah, you have to look at the extinction of the star. And basically, the star will appear fainter. Now, there are formulas that can make that correction. But basically, if I'm looking at a star that low, the comparison stars are going to be extinct as well. But usually what I try to do is observe above that. Okay, besides the trees won't allow me to do the rest of that.
Can you actually get an idea of the metal content of stars as well? When you're looking at them? Spectroscopically, just iron or lead or different elements in the stars?
If you're doing spectroscopy, you could. Okay, you'd see lines.
Okay.
But you're mostly going to see hydrogen and helium.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you, do you have a list of stars you would focus on to create your database?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. And there were some that I had the charts memorized, so I didn't even bother with the chart. In fact, Leslie memorized 300 fields.
Wow.
And so he could just go through and
So how many did you observe on a regular basis then, as you got your data together?
oh, there were about 300-400.
Wow, it's very impressive.
Yeah. Yes.
Could you talk a little bit more about Leslie's, the telescope that went missing? That just sounds like a really interesting.
Yeah. It's suspected that one of his sons has the lens. But, we don't know.
Have you been to Delphos in the last 5 years or something, 7 years?
Yes, I went past Leslie's house, and it's sad.
Yeah, but then on the positive side, downtown, they have
Yes,
a
they
little,
have
that little
the,
museum thing.
They have a museum, and they have a sundial that's devoted to him. Yeah. Someone here had one? No? Okay, thank you again very much.